Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the third episode of Yes.AI. My disclaimer is Yes.AI is not a website. You cannot go and, try to find any of these materials that we talk about on such a website because it doesn't exist. But if you go on, there's a YouTube channel for Yes.AI for all the videos we've done so far. Today, I have a special guest, Isaro Carter. She is an IP and business attorney. And we're just going to be discussing, some of the IP considerations as well as other legal considerations and ethics that come up with the use of AI. And we'll start off with like a softball for Isaro, where she's just going to talk about, common mistakes, common issues that come up for businesses when they're, really trying to organize their IP, make sure they have that stuff in order. But before we get started, let's hear from Isaro Carter, the managing attorney of the Carter firm.
Hi, everyone. Like Aubria said, my name is Isaro Carter. I'm the founder and principal attorney of the Carter firm. Been doing this for 5 years now, and IP is definitely an intellectual property, excuse me, specifically as it pertains to trademarks, copyright, and trade secrets, has been the main practice area of the firm for quite a while now. And I service a lot of people who are in the creative industries, but especially since this recent AI boom, a lot of tech companies have now come to the forefront and are, slowly becoming a large part of my client base. Um, and I really enjoy the work that I do, and I got into it because I care about the things that people create, and I found very often that a lot of the times when people from marginalized communities were creating things, a lot of their ideas. Just to put it plainly, were getting stolen from them, and a lot of people were exploiting, like these creatives. And so I decided, let me see what I can do to help the little guy, like in these fight against like a lot of the giants in the industry. So that's how I started doing what I do, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Ambria.
All right. Thank you so much, Asaro. And so we're just going to jump right into it. Like,
Mhm.
what are the most common IP mistakes that you find businesses are making, especially when they're scaling, and how can they avoid some of these mistakes?
So the biggest mistake that I see is people, like they get really excited about, this new business that they want to do. Maybe it's because, they've been sitting on it for a while, or they finally got to a place where they can, afford to start the business or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're at the beginning, they're really excited, and they have a name for whatever reason, and, they have their emotional attachment to the name or whatever the case
Mm-hmm.
is. And then they immediately get to investing in like brand assets. Like they're getting the logo done, they're
Right.
packaging done, they're building out the website, they're trying to buy, like the domain, they're registering, the company, whether that's the LLC or the corporation, and they get to a point where they're like, oh yeah, maybe I should, start registering the trademark for this business that I have. And then
Mm,
then after they've invested all of that money, and it's sometimes a little bit of money, it might be around $5,000, some smaller businesses,
right.
there are other bigger businesses that are spending 10, 15, even $20,000 on all of these, brand assets.
Right.
And they come to me and they're like, okay, I have all these things. And I'm like, great, let's do the trademark search. And then what comes back is that there's a bunch of other people using the,
Mm,
right? That's the biggest mistake that I see. Or it's not so much that someone is using the same exact name, but they're using a name that is very, very similar to it. And usually, right, it's an issue because, in my professional opinion, I think that they're going to have some issues
mm-hmm.
registering the name. And so that's a problem because now it's like, okay, well, they've paid all this money to get all this done. And then they've also paid me to come back and tell them,
Mm-hmm.
hey, this is not going to work. So, how can people in these situations technically avoid this in the first place? Um, the biggest thing I always say is come talk to a lawyer first. If you
Mm-hmm.
like the idea before you take the plunge, talk to an IP attorney like me, or like any one of my colleagues out there, right? Have that conversation and be like, okay, so maybe I'm not registering it yet, but I want to do a knockout search. I want to do
Mm-hmm.
a search just to see what's there in the landscape, so that before I make this 10, 15, $20,000 investment in all of these assets, I can decide if this name that I love is actually going to be, like the right decision.
Yeah.
Or, if it's not quite right, how can I work with an attorney to be sure that the final iteration of what I'm creating is something that is not only not going to be similar to what's out there, but also something that's going to be registrable? Because I think a lot of the times people don't realize that, you know, you want to create, I guess, like a brand for something, but the name is sometimes too descriptive too. And that's one of those things where it's like
Mm,
the USPTO isn't really going to allow for that unless, like certain other circumstances. Sorry, that's
yeah.
technical, but I guess you might tell, like, I geek out to this stuff. So
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's fair, right? I mean, you are my IP attorney.
yes.
I tell people all the time, like, I'm like, yeah, my IP attorney told me I can't do that, or I shouldn't do that, or whatever. And for me, like, I think a lot of business owners, the idea that like you should talk to an attorney first is almost daunting, because all they're thinking about is, oh, I have to spend money, to talk to an attorney or whatever. But
Yeah.
like, to me, it's like, it's better to me, it's like, I prefer to spend preventative money
Yeah.
than I do, like, put,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, like, now I like spent all of this money and
Yeah.
it's gone. Like, I can't actually, like, I can now risk being sued by somebody
Yeah.
because I've been using their trademark, and so, like, this is why it's so
Absolutely.
important, right? Like, actually,
Mhm.
like, making sure you do the trademark search, because you
Yeah.
don't want to be put in a, because you're thinking, oh, I don't want to talk to an attorney because I don't want to spend the money, but you might need an attorney to spend way more money than that preventative call might have cost you, you
Yeah.
know? And so, like, I think that's really important. And what's funny, I don't know if it's because I am an attorney, or um I'm just like naturally paranoid. I think it might be the latter. Um but I remember reaching out to you and
Yeah.
being
No
like,
worries, though.
"Oh, I'm thinking about using, this particular moniker, and I want to trademark it." And I remember you kind of like talking about the fact, "Oh wow, that's so good that like you came to me first, like you
Yes,
didn't."
I
Like,
remember exactly what you're talking about. Yes, because that would have been an issue. Yeah.
and but yeah, and so it's like, to me, I think that's something we kind of want to like hit home in this episode as well. It's like it doesn't hurt to talk to the expert on the thing first, right? And I think with AI technology specifically, like, there's so many people talking
Mhm.
about AI technology. Like
Mhm.
like it's a buzzword right now. Like, people who haven't like read a single sentence about AI are holding themselves out,
Mhm.
as the the thought leader on the thing right now.
Mhm.
And so making sure that you're educating yourself, but you're talking to the real, you're actually reviewing real experts. You're not just looking at a post online, because that's going to impact how you manage, right? And actually want to skip ahead
Mhm.
to an AI question with respect to IP, because a lot of people are using, different LLMs to
Mhm.
create for their businesses, right? And
Mhm.
so as you're like generating this content for your websites, for your LinkedIn pages, for whatever, for the book you're writing, um you know how does that, like, who owns who ends up owning that resulting IP, and how do you structure, agreements to protect your interests as a business owner if you're using these different AI agents to help you produce, for your business?
I think that's such a good question, and it's a many a layered one.
Mm-hmm.
And very interestingly enough, a friend of a friend just works for the copyright office here in the
Right.
U.S. And they just published a circular that she wrote about just like AI and copyright.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely on my reading list.
It's
But
on mine too. I downloaded it.
yeah, I'm sure you saw it. So it's interesting because at present, the Copyright Office isn't allowing, AI generated works to actually be
Copywritten.
claimed, right?
Yeah.
Like, we don't have that. They're just saying that like the right isn't there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that makes a lot of sense, especially those of us who were able to take copyright classes in law school or just generally nerd out to these things
Mm-hmm.
because there was even because there's this underlying idea that it's human authorship that's
Mm-hmm.
important, that's valued, and that is to be protected, and that's like at the
Mm-hmm.
heart of copyright law here in the U.S. And so and I say it's interesting because in law school there was this case, and I totally forget the name, but um, there was a great ape. I don't know what kind of ape it was, but they were taking like pictures of themselves, and the whole
Mm-hmm.
was, does this ape now own the copyright of the images that it took of itself? The ruling was
Mm-hmm.
no, it wasn't a human being. And so, if, right, a machine also
Yeah.
a human being, and I guess we know that it's very, very far from even thinking like human beings, even
Mm-hmm.
that is the goal eventually. And it seems like we're not too far off from that happening in the next couple of years. Interesting, a different conversation to have. Um, but when it comes to ownership, like those elements of the things that business owners and just creatives in general are
Mm-hmm.
with AI, some parts are not going to be copyrightable. And you'll see on the applications, there are things that you have to disclaim and say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm registering these aspects of this thing that I'm looking
Right.
to have on the register, but this part specifically was AI generated, and thus I'm not claiming copyright ownership in that. Um, and I think that just like with any other technological advancement, right, business owners, creatives
Mm-hmm.
have to get creative in the ways that we're using AI in business to create things. Like, we're going to have to just remember that it is, a tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Mm-hmm.
that like we're creating something with the intention that we get to. I want to say it like we're just, you're not going to be able to own it. Not right now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you have to be very careful with how you're disclosing, how you're creating things, and like what you're putting out there, and what you're disclaiming, and understanding that, okay, if you put this out there and it was AI generated, maybe that means that someone else can use it too, um,
Mm-hmm.
without your permission, or without people being able to essentially like pay you for it. And I think it's very interesting because I'm not seeing that come up as a problem with a lot of the businesses and things that I'm working with. A lot of people
Right.
are letting me know that they're using it internally, to
Mm.
get tasks done. But when it comes to creation, a lot of people have taken a huge step back. And I think that in the economies that I work in, there's a real aversion
Mm-hmm.
using AI generated works just in general, or just AI in their creative process in general.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of fear that they're going to be replaced by it. And so they've taken like a firm stance against it. And I mean that in like with the creatives that I work with.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of interesting questions, and there are a lot of cases right now that are, a landmark, going to be like landmark decisions that let us
Mm-hmm.
like where ownership is going, what's going to be allowed, what how we are going to have to be reconceptualizing infringement and all those kinds of things.
Yeah. I mean, so do you
Sorry,
said
that's a long-winded.
but I don't know. I like long answers.
Mhm.
So for me, it's like because we kind of have to be thoughtful in how we respond, right? And
Mhm.
how we even kind of break down some of these because it's very complicated. And
It is.
even in our long answers, like we're not really scratching the surface of
And it's hard
re-
to stay on.
yeah, yeah, because you kind of like think about it, especially as an attorney, like you're not just thinking IP, now you're thinking, oh wait, but like, is it fraud if I hold this out as my own when it's not really mine, like, and so there's that, right? So there's like the
Mhm.
criminal aspect of it. And
Yeah.
then and then you think about, just as you're using that technology, like for example, I'll give you an example from my own use of the technology.
Mhm.
So I use a lot of the different like chat gpt or genesis or whomever or
Mhm.
DeepSeek. I
Mhm.
use them to help me do scaffolding.
Mm.
And that was something like we did, like, you think about that when you had like English courses, like you'd have to
Mhm.
like scaffold for your essays and,
Mhm.
kind of like, and so for me, it's like a great tool for pulling all the information that I need.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
And so I remember when I was writing Adventures of Boo and Chin, I
Mhm.
wanted to do a butterfly scene.
Mhm.
And it's funny because like I went to the aquarium with my godson and my goddaughter. We were in a planetarium. We did encounter butterflies, but while we were there, it wasn't like an educational per se trip. Like we were just kind of having fun, like, oh, the butterfly touched me, like, and this was kind of what was happening, but we
Yeah.
didn't pay a lot of attention to like, well, what kind of butterfly is this, why is it doing that, and that sort of thing. And so I remember I wanted to include a scene in like the final book where to kind of like recreate that scene but add like a couple other god kids in it and take myself out of it. um and so, but I don't know anything about butterflies.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know anything about butterfly, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I could like ask ChatGPT to like narrow down like the types of butterflies. So I was like, oh, what are like the like what are the most beautiful, but the top 10 most beautiful butterflies,
Right.
and then I was like, okay, what are the top 10 rarest, butterflies? What,
Mhm.
poisonous butterflies, like all of these things. And then I didn't stop there though, which I think is what a lot of people end up doing with the
Mhm.
technology, which
Mhm.
creates these like IP issues, is you end up just kind of pulling what it generates.
Mhm.
But I remember like actually deciding like, okay, I'm gonna look up like these two butterflies, those two, I'm kind of like, cherry picking, and then going and doing my own actual research on
Yeah.
the butterflies.
Yeah.
In a way, and I won't tell you that I was doing it. I wasn't necessarily like fact checking.
Mhm.
It was more, I need more, like I didn't ask it for much. I just wanted like a restricted list that I could go and now like do my actual like work on, right?
Mhm.
But I feel like not a lot of people are doing that, which is why there's this
Mhm.
issue
Mhm.
with,
Yeah.
like where the copyright issue comes into place, or even like a trademark issue, because I can say, hey Chatty, can you give me like 10 monikers for this potential business that I'm like coming up with, right?
Mhm.
Now, who's to stop Chatty from giving those same monikers to somebody else?
Right. Right. And I think it's also interesting in the way that just the technology has been marketed towards the
Mm-hmm.
mainstream too, because and the thing is, like, you'll hear a lot of people who are very, very well versed in AI constantly say, well, it's been around and we've been using it. And it's only now that it's been, iterated into a format where the mainstream can now use it in their everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, fair. But I think that like we have to consider too that look, the way that like economies and like selling and marketing and things work, um, everybody is always trying to sell you something to like, right? Like trying
Yeah.
to sell the consumer base something, right? And I think that this is another thing that has been posited to us as something that is beneficial. It can help us in all these ways. You can use it as an assistant. You can use it to help you in your business,
Mm-hmm.
help you in your creation, like all this stuff. But we really have to maintain that, healthy level of skepticism and willingness to go back and double check our work the same way that you would double check the work of a regular assistant, the same way that
Mhm.
double check uh, anyone's work, like an intern's work, anything like that, because it really does still need a lot of human oversight. And how many times have we been sold something where it breaks down on you, or it malfunctions, or this or it's
Mhm.
that? It's like I don't know why now, that just because it's technology and it's on our computer, and I don't know, whatever beliefs that we hold, like tech and science to be like completely infallible. Well, maybe not science, let me not misspeak there, but just like technology, right?
Yeah.
um it's still, right now, AI, it still requires a lot of human oversight to
Mhm.
get something that is usable, right? And to
Yeah.
get it to a place where the outcome that you're being spit out
Mhm.
is something that you can't really trust it, like at face value right now. You
Yeah.
do have to go back and double check and do your work. And I think a part of the problem, right? And I'm saying all this, right, to get back to my point, where part of the problem is it's been marketed towards people as like, this is perfect right now to use. And it's also been marketed as something that people can use in their businesses, but the development of it hasn't taken a long time. A
Yeah.
lot of experts from a lot of different fields have boots on the ground in developing it. So that's why, like, you'll see, like, way, I don't know, maybe it was like 2, 3 years ago, there were the attorneys that were using it to like write briefs and everything, and it was hallucinating cases, and they submitted those cases
Yeah.
in court, and had to be reprimanded for that and like disciplined for it. But I mean, yes, it was marketed though, like towards people to say, like, yeah, this is this perfect thing that you can use everywhere and for everything. And while I think that, yes, as attorneys, we have this like higher standard where we have to go
Mhm.
back and double check work, there's a part of me that still feels like, well, I'm also like a little bit like, well, is it, how much blame is really on
Yeah.
him there when he was told this thing and he believed it? We're not supposed to believe everything, but
I don't know. I'm
but
gonna push back on that because because
yeah,
going back to your premise that like we're all
yeah,
being sold something, right? And this wouldn't be the
yeah,
first technology or the first advancement that we've had sold to us that
yeah,
hasn't worked out in the way that they said it would, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah.
what I find really interesting about AI technology is the fact that when you talk to somebody who is pro AI, it's
Mhm,
almost like there's a guild over their eyes where or a cloak where it's like they can't see
mhm,
any of the potential issues, right? So that's like one end of the
mm,
spectrum. And then you have the
mhm,
people that are anti AI, and they
mm,
similarly have a cloak as well where it's kind of like throw
mhm,
it in throw it in hellfire. It's
mhm.
dangerous, like it kind of reminds me, and maybe this dates me a little bit, but it reminds me of like the whole like Y2K like fanfare, where like
Yeah, like the
you
early
know
days of the
where
internet.
people invested in a lot of resources, because allegedly we were gonna go dark January
Mhm,
1, 2000. I was
mhm,
16 at the
mhm,
time. And or
mhm,
gonna be like 15 going on 16. And and then
mhm.
like nothing happened. I remember I was awake and I was like, oh, like nothing happened.
Yeah, and even for me, like, I think of it actually more like the way that Wikipedia was
Hmm.
treated, when it first
Yeah.
came
Like
out,
like
and
like
I
it
think
was
that
like
since then,
Encyclopedia Britannica or something. Yeah.
yeah, and, like, at the time, because it was so new, I think, right, like, hindsight is always 20/20, but I think that a lot of the criticisms of it back then were
Hmm.
fair, right? But I think that as more time went on, and like they were able to gain some legitimacy, and they were able to, like, get the funding that
Right.
they needed to hire all of like the people that were necessary to like do the
Mm-hmm.
edits and to lock certain articles and things like that, and um, have people who are like researchers and like really like getting everything down. I think that today, like as Wikipedia stands, it's a really reliable
Mm-hmm.
resource for information, especially when you need quick
Yeah.
information. Back then it really wasn't, and I think that right now AI is kind of like
No,
that.
I agree. Like
Does
I
that?
and frankly, like most of the experts that are in the middle on AI. And so it's
Yeah.
like I think of like Dr. Tenmit Gabru. She used to be
Mhm,
heading like the research analytics
mhm,
for Google years ago and blew the
mhm.
whistle on a lot of things there. And
Yeah.
it's consistently producing more and more research,
Mhm,
along with other scholars. Like I'm actually reading Karen Howe's book Empire of AI right now, and highly recommend
mhm,
it. You know, and I'm like plugging people that haven't paid me, but and then and another book that I read that I really enjoyed, and I think I've read now probably 10 books on a just
mhm,
like, and I read them in preparation for this series because I was like, I want to give
mhm,
people good information that they can now go
mhm,
back and like check, like in the same way
mhm.
that I'm saying you need to check AI. No, you need to check me. You need to check the words that are coming out of my mouth. Like I am not holding myself out as an expert on this. Like I'm
Yeah,
I'm just learning. But something that I think that for me, what's saddening about it is how much resources are being
mhm,
used with the use of AI technology, and not just money. Like
mhm.
I think about the people that are actually moderating what comes through, right? Because like we're calling it artificial intelligence, right? But it ain't. It's actually humans going through it and making sure, a lot of times people that are underpaid to do the actual work, because they're mostly not doing that work in the states, because then it would be too expensive to move as
Mhm,
quickly and scale as quickly, right? And so
mhm,
like these
mhm.
are some, I think like this is where the ethics of things come into play, because now it's like I just remember being bombarded with, ESG principles, climate
Mhm,
change, caring, social
mhm,
governance, how much energy we're
mhm,
using. And I think it's
mhm.
something like it's like like a ridiculous amount of clean water that
Yeah,
like we're not talking salt water. We talk about the water that people drink.
yeah.
That's being used up every time somebody runs a prompt through
Right,
Chat GPT, right?
right. And I don't even think people understand like the scale of that with how popular it is
Yeah.
right now. And I think that it might be hard for just like a human mind to
Mm-hmm.
fathom. And I think that that's part of the problem, that a lot of the things that we do now with technology and just like in the
Yeah.
world that we're in, like it's so interesting. It's so interesting because I was gonna say I feel like this is like a problem that has stemmed like all the way back to like when globalization
Mm-hmm.
like was thing, but I think that at what point can we say that like globalization really started with like all the people moving around and stuff? But that's not the point. I don't think that people really know like how far a lot of these things go. And I think that one of the points that you made, right? Like we're not holding ourselves out to be experts, but one of the things that I think like helps me have a healthy dose of skepticism and like to really understand like what's going on here, right? Not only just like how these
Mm-hmm.
things work like surface level when we're interacting with them, but behind the scenes like what's going on is really sitting down and taking the time to do the research for yourself too, and not, and I know people always say this all the time too, and it's one of those things that grinds my gear, but like doing research for yourself, but going on these websites that are, offering you like these AI products and these AI services. I know people say, "Oh, you don't read the terms and conditions." Maybe do
Mm-hmm.
that. Maybe terms and conditions. Maybe read the privacy policy. Maybe read all of like the fine print that's at the bottom of the page and like the things that are
Yeah.
linked to. Sometimes you might find that those links are
Mhm.
broken. there's not
You might
there's
find
not
there's
anything
nothing
actually
there.
there,
No, you know.
you know, and that's information in and of
Mhm.
itself,
Mhm.
right? That tells you about the company and like its commitment to
Yeah.
privacy or its commitment to
Wow,
like
that's so
the
true.
services that it's offering to,
Yeah.
right? The what it's offering to its users. And then maybe you might be reading something where you say, okay, well, I on the front page it said one thing, but really when you dig into what the terms and conditions are, what the privacy policy is on the back end, it's worded a bit
Mhm.
differently, you know? And I think that that's really where the information gathering and understanding is at
Yeah.
its best. And like, yes, like hearing what these thought leaders have to say is very
Mhm.
important, right? Who are the people who have actually dedicated all of their
Right.
waking hours to understanding these things through and through? And there's nothing that can, like undermine that. But also understanding things for yourself is really important, but that takes time and that takes dedication, especially like as quickly as our world is moving and as like wide scale and like just this stuff goes so deep. It's like that's why like we can have
Yeah.
this conversation and it branches out and we have like so many tangents because it's like your brain is trying to catch on and like latch on to
Mhm.
everything and like understand as it's happening and as it's developing. And that's just like on the tech level. So when you take the tech level and you put it in a legal context, there's even more. And that's why we've even alluded to ourselves, right? Like, oh yeah, there are all these articles that I have to
Yeah.
go back and
Yeah.
read. Like as people who, like bottom lines, whose revenues, right, are impacted by these things, like there's also right that impetus of having to know what's going on and how it's moving and how it's
Mhm.
shaping things. But it's a lot to digest. And so that's why I say sometimes I don't blame people when they don't understand and they make these
Mhm.
mistakes, because I don't think that they understand how complex these things actually are, and um, how much, I guess, like personal integrity when it comes to understanding and knowledge is
Mhm.
necessary to engage with these technologies in a
Yeah.
responsible way.
No, I think that's right. And to me it's like while I pay attention to the thought leaders, like
Mhm.
I'm not sitting down like watching every video a thought leader makes. I just like I
Yeah.
personally I don't have the energy for that. And so so like I would never like that's definitely not what we're like saying here, but I think getting your information for me it's like I wanted to hear what like the doomsday people had to say, and I want to
Oh,
hear where like the people that are like I'm a disciple of AI first type
yeah.
people, because I want to see what their thought process is, because
Mhm.
once you kind of know where people are coming from,
Yeah.
it's a lot easier for you to come up with your own conclusions based in a little bit more objectivity, and also understanding your own biases. Like I
Mhm.
think about it, I'm like I tell people like I have the type of personality where I could be easily seduced by technology
Mm.
because I like speed.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the way that artificial intelligence and these LLM models are presented to us, it's like, oh, you could do it faster, you know
Right,
um
right,
you know
right.
but how many times have we been told in our lives, no, you need to like take a step back, you need to slow down, especially for like the really important decisions. There's always that like caution that even our own
Mhm.
intuition tells us, like it's not necessarily coming from outside. Like you think about when you go to a store or something and somebody's like rushing you, or
Mhm.
you're trying to do a business deal and somebody's rushing
Mhm.
you, like is
Mhm.
your like how does that like how does your mind treat that? How does your body treat that? Like, like does it
Yeah.
treat it with, respect, like, oh, I'm gonna run ahead and do it? Or is it more like, oh wait, maybe I need to like take a minute, take a breather, maybe I need a day to think about this.
Yeah.
And And I think like that's really what we're trying to push here is, on the
Yeah.
one hand, this technology is good. It's actually good for humans if we remain human centric in our use, and in our production of the technology, right? But I alluded to this in the first episode, the intro episode, where I talked about the fact that most of the people pitching AI to an organization right now are pitching it as a human replacement.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to a wider um question of values, right? That like we have in
Hmm.
our society in general. And I hate to like take it there, but none of these things
No,
exist in a
and we
vacuum,
have to go
right?
there. Like, how can we talk about policy and ethics and law without talking about the
Mhm.
people that are being impacted, right? So please
Right.
go on.
Yeah. Like I think, you know, to in some ways I think that the plea to keep these technologies human centric while we pitch them and while they are marketed and why we all are interested in using them, um, is presented as going
Hmm.
beyond what a human can do. Like it's really
Hmm.
interesting, right? Like reconcile, because I'm like, are we speaking out of both sides
Hmm.
of our mouth when we say that?
And I would
You
say
know?
no. And here's my take on it. It's like I can care,
Mhm,
like as much advancement as I have, I can still care about the humans,
mhm,
right? And so my if I'm making some technology that's supposed to increase efficiency and increase
mhm,
effectiveness, right? Perhaps
mhm,
it's less about replacing the human and more about replacing the 7-day work week that has been thrust onto everyone and making it a 4-day work week. Because if we can do things 50 times
mhm,
as fast now, do I really need
mhm,
humans to be in the office or working from home 7 days a week? Like, do I really need somebody working night, like somebody who's working at a financial institution that's using AI
mhm,
technology to
mhm,
generate some of the financial models, which they're very
mhm,
capable of doing? It's like, I'm so to
mhm,
me, it's like that's how we can make it human centric, right? We understand how much water is being used
mhm,
to
mhm,
build these massive centers that we're creating, right? Because let's be honest,
mhm,
the generation isn't happening on my MacBook Air that I'm using at the
mhm,
moment. Like it's actually
mhm,
being sent to a
mhm,
cloud, which is being supported
mhm,
by
mhm,
some data center, insert wherever,
mhm,
whatever continent it happens to be on. And naturally, a
mhm,
lot of these companies are they're stationed in the US, but a lot of the
mhm,
impact is happening outside of, like, a lot of like the human impact, the most egregious human impact as of now is happening outside of US soil, right? And so to me, it's like, how do we reconcile that? It's like, okay, instead of being so quick to scale and maximize our money, how do we
mhm.
maximize technology that isn't anti-human?
I wonder though, right? And looking back on human history, right? And like patterns through which like we, like behave, uh, has that ever really been something that we do? And I mean, like there's on the one hand, right, like so many industries and um I guess like economies have been disrupted by new technology that completely replace humans, and then we just like move and adapt and like do something different. And there's something to be said about that, positive or negative. Um, but then I also wonder, like at this point in history, do the people who have the resources to develop these things and put them to market and grow them and scale them on mass, do they even care about the human
Well,
impact?
and to me, it's like if they don't. And no, and that's a fair question, but if they don't care, why are we supporting their technology? Why are we making it popular, right? Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
if no one uses this technology, right?
Mhm.
Like, and that's really where the education comes into play, right? Like, I know one of the most popular people that's attached to AI technology. Like, word on the street is he bends the truth a lot, right? And so, like, to me, it's like, okay, so I don't know how that translates to anybody watching this or Isaro, but I know how that translates to me. What you tell me is this person is a pathological liar. And because you bending the truth a lot. Well, if you bend the truth, it ain't true anymore. So that means you lying a lot. And if you're lying a lot, why are people in your closest circle okay with you lying a lot, right? And if we as a society can now have access to that information and continue
Mhm.
to support what you're doing, like, what, like, have we become so desensitized by the harms that have happened to us over the years that we're willing to kind of say, oh, whatever, we give it up? Or is it the mindset you think of the people who think, you know even though there's data showing that this happens to, 2 out of 3 people, they believe they're going to be the 1 out of 3?
I feel like there's that. There's a lot of like the point that like I was making earlier where like people just don't even really
Mm-hmm.
know how hard and impactful it is. And I don't know whether that would like sway their
Mm-hmm.
decision to engage and, like use it. Otherwise, I think that there are some
Mm-hmm.
people that I know personally 100% like
Yeah.
understand the impacts. I'm not using it at all because I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
contribute to
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
negative. To me, I feel like some of those are some of the most human centric
Yeah.
amongst
Yeah.
us, right? Like, to not engage at all. Um, but I also think that there are some people who are, engaging with it, but like from the ethics standpoint, in an effort to, either minimize the negative human impact or find ways to eliminate it altogether. And, like that's interesting. And then there are like people who are like, I don't care. Like this is a way for me to make more money, and my bills need to
Mm-hmm.
be paid
Mm-hmm.
today.
Mm-hmm.
To be paid today. Like it doesn't matter. Like all these things that are going to happen, I'm going to be dead before it matters
We
anyway.
hope.
Like so many, right? Yeah, we hope, right? Um, and I think that just like with any other human struggle for balance and homeostasis and just like positive outcomes for all of us as a whole, like there are so many different thoughts and so many ways to
Mm-hmm.
like push forward. Personally, I feel like I'm just sitting here watching everything unfold and like just trying to figure out what is a best way to move
Mm-hmm.
forward while also not missing an opportunity to move
Yeah.
forward. There I don't know, like there's just so many like, as a thoughtful person, as someone who like who could just sit and think all
Mm-hmm.
day
Mm-hmm.
and if I don't push myself to, there are so many answers and so many non-answers at the same
Yeah.
time. I don't know. That might sound ridiculous, but that's just how I feel about it right now. That's
No,
how I'm
but I think that
processing
that's
it.
actually like a true statement of what is
Mhm.
happening with generative AI and these large language models, is that there really are no distinct answers. And
And I
and
don't think
I
they're
and I and I and I and but I think part of the problem is a lot of the companies that are, launching right now are
Mhm,
purporting to
mhm.
have the answer, right? And so, which is very interesting,
It's just at the end of
right?
the day,
And
right?
so it's like when one of the people I read recently kind of
Mhm,
put it this way, like it's really just good marketing, right? At the end of the day,
mhm,
it's really good marketing because I don't know
mhm,
about you, but I asked Chatty to give me 2,500 words for something recently
Mhm,
because I'm like,
mhm,
I want to see if you could really do that. And Chatty
mhm.
gave me 1,300 words talking about it's your essay is about approximately 2,513 words, and I was like, and because I've spent a vast
Mhm,
majority of my life writing essays, I could just
mhm.
look at words on a page and be like, oh, that's 500 words. That's like, I'm not good because I've had to do the word counts before. And so like I remember, so I'm
Yeah,
like looking, I'm like,
yeah.
if Chatty gonna lie to me
Oh,
about the
yeah.
word count and I could check that.
What else is it? Is it lying, or is it more so like programmed to give you what you want and present it with a
Well, that's
smile?
it, right?
Because at the
And
end of
I'm
the
sorry for humanizing ChatGPT. Like, I did a really good job. I did a really good job the first like two episodes. Even like
Mhm.
hallucinations. Like, no, like it's like a programming error. Like, it did not hallucinate because it's not a human being. But I
Yeah.
think equate if we equate it or get people into the mindset of, oh, this technology is functioning like humans and putting these very human characteristics onto the tech, right? It almost programs us as humans now to believe, oh, chat Genesis is on the same page as me. DeepSeek is on the same page as me. But when you really think about it, all it is a bunch of humans. It's really me against maybe 10,000 humans. And
And you just wonder what marketing agencies
and
are
I'm
behind it, who they
but like,
good.
no,
It's
it's really,
good. They
but
people.
when you really kind of break it in, so talk about the comparison factor, right?
Mhm.
But I'm still tripping it up. So it's not 10,000 of the most brilliant minds programming and moderating the content that it's essentially pulling from to generate things later, right? And so
Mhm.
so to me it's like that's I think that's something we all kind of need to be aware of, as well as as people engaging the technology, so we don't deify it, because if imperfect people are creating this technology, there's going to be imperfect output. There's going to be imperfect consequences, right? That's a
Right.
really good euphemism for bad outcomes, imperfect consequences. Maybe I should be on their marketing team.
Mhm. That'd be great.
But so
Um,
I guess my final question for you is, you
mhm,
know, what do you think? And maybe this is like a broader question that like we can't even fully answer in this episode, and may need to do in like one of our
mhm,
later episodes later in the
mhm,
year. But
mhm.
how, right now there's really minimal policies setting guardrails for,
Yeah.
even like in the recent copyright cases from last week, like, it's like,
Mhm.
talk about talking from both sides of the mouth. Right? If you look at what the rulings are for those cases, it's like, wait, that doesn't make sense. you know
Yeah.
and so how can, what are, just kind of at a really high level, what are you thinking about, like what kind of principles and guardrails do you think would be really essential for creators while still promoting like innovation and access? And I think we've already kind of like played with some of it.
Yeah.
And so like
Yeah.
kind of like quick summary of like what you think, policymakers should really be looking at, to really help, on the one hand, not stymie creativity and growth for the individual, but also promoting this like mass innovation and access for all, because let's be honest, there's a lot of accessibility that happens as a result of AI technology as well.
That is it's such an interesting question because I ask myself this a lot and I sit and I think about it a lot. And I always like get up, like with coming to like different conclusions because there's so many
Mm-hmm.
different outcomes and there's so many things like with each decision that you make and eventually,
Mm-hmm.
right, you have to make and just like live with the consequences of that. So I'm not so sure that thank God it's not me who has to make those decisions because I don't know if I could ever bring myself to. I think it's going to be helpful to have a healthy dose of skepticism and reminding, like the policymaker that
Mm-hmm.
is, making these decisions, understanding that it is like in its
Yeah.
early days. Like when we think of the first iPhones, the first iPods, like those types of things, like compared to what we
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
now, piece of
Yeah.
junk, right? Like a relic, beautiful, we love it, but a piece of junk. Consider that like you're making decisions right now on something that eventually is going to be considered a piece of
Yeah.
junk, right? And like not effective and not helpful. There's that. And it's so hard, I think, to constantly keep in context, like the present, the
Mm-hmm.
past, and like where we want to go as a society. And I feel like even that last one, like where we want to go as a society, it
Yeah.
changes every day. Um, Having a healthy dose of skepticism is going to help a lot. And I think that honestly, the opinions that come out and like we read them and we feel like it seems like they are speaking out of both sides of their mouth. And I think that that's because in like the grand scheme of things, like when we zoom
Mm-hmm.
out, to me at least, and that's like as an optimist and like a hopeful
Mm-hmm.
person from
Mm-hmm.
nature, the things that would have me not. Um, they're leaving room for
Mm-hmm.
change, right? And I think that that's their acknowledgement that we really do not have all the answers and we don't have all the information necessary to make the right decision. Because when you think of the policymaker's mind or the traditional policymaker's mind, it's a
Mm-hmm.
legal mind. We need facts, we need information to make decisions and feel like concrete and resolute like in those decisions. And the fact of the matter is we don't have all the information necessary currently.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree with the not having enough information.
I don't think
And
we do.
and
I don't think
and
we do. I think we have really good
mm-hmm.
arguments on many sides, and I think that it's great to want to be hopeful. I think that it's responsible to be skeptical. I don't know what the right combination is to help humanity move forward in a way that is least
Yeah.
destructive to us in the long run.
And so when I say that I don't think I think we have enough information to make more precise decisions, I think we have to look at impact, like current impact.
Hmm.
And right now,
Mhm.
these decisions are impacting creators in a very negative way, including
100%.
people who went through the trouble of getting their
Yeah.
trademarks, getting their copyright. Like they did everything by the book. They paid a lawyer to protect themselves, and now they're being told, "Oh, well, this is considered, like an educational use, if you will." But
Yep.
is it an educational use if it's not a human? And I think that's a question that needs to be answered. And the reason I say that is because, can the technology learn, or can the technology process? And so it goes back to this
Mhm.
like humanizing factor that is happening with the
Mhm.
technology that really muddies the water. And I think that's where like a lot of the previous things that we took for granted, because it goes back to what you were saying about the apes taking photos, right? Like, to kind of like bring it back
Mhm.
full circle, like they didn't
Mhm.
own the copyright of their photographs, even if they took the photograph. And so I would
Mhm.
liken, if I were, for any of you IP attorneys, um, thinking of a creative argument, I would actually liken AI technology to the ape because it is actually not
And you know what
human.
makes
And because they're not using the brightest and the baddest
mm-hmm,
people to program these models, then I would
mm-hmm,
to me, like, no, like this is actually an ape. That we like, yes, we have to plug it in, but it's still an ape. And so if that's the case, then who do we hold accountable? Do we say, oh, the technology? Oh, well, this is different because it's a technology, or do we say no, as an owner of the company, you're responsible for the infringement that your machine has done, and this is how we do it. I mean, that's how I would do it, right? But I am not an IP attorney.
I think it's interesting though, because I think that before we even get to, I think like the making the decision and how it applies at law, I think that a lot of the people, like for your argument, I completely get it, I completely understand it. Those are the people that I
Mm-hmm.
represent, right? But policymakers, I think that we have to ask the question of who are their constituents, what are the interests of those constituents, and not just
Mm-hmm.
us, right? Not just like the everyday person, right? Like there are other people who are not just the everyday person who have rights, right? And like they're also fighting for their right to make as much money as possible and like get as far as possible as they can, and they have the resources, and they're in those courts and they are lobbying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they are
And
in
so
people's bags,
no,
like
and no, and,
you
and
know
but that's, I guess that,
and that's why I think that like the
yeah, and I
policy,
and
like when we ask like what's the right thing to do, it's an interesting question for me, because I'm like the actual policymaker, right? Like if it was me, it would be different. But I think that the people who are sitting in those positions, I think that they're balancing a lot of things. And because like they too are human beings and they too are fallible, they have their motivations that they use to like make these decisions. And I think like I can say like what I feel like me
mm-hmm.
personally, right? It would be the right thing to do, but then I would be ignoring a whole other part of the population. And then we have to get into, is that fair of me to do despite how much of the population like they
Mm-hmm.
are? And then on the flip side, when that small part of the population are the only people whose interests and concerns are being addressed, this whole other part of the population is being ignored. And that's why we're having these conversations in the
Mm-hmm.
first place. Striking that balance, I think they have a very, very, very difficult
Mm-hmm.
position. And that's why I say, like, I don't know what the
Yeah,
right
and
answer
and
is.
I'm not purporting to have the right answer either. I'm just saying, like, I
Yeah.
would I would push against even the balancing act, because at the end of the day,
Because
um a
I would have wanted the monkey to own
yeah, but
their.
at the end of the day, when we really think about it, a corporation, right? Does a corporation
Mhm.
have access to the Bill of Rights? Right?
And it's not so much that I'm thinking about like is the corporation a person, but like is the person who is employing all of these like bendy aspects of the law to their benefit. Like it's not so much like what are their rights, but it's like they're fighting in a way where they have the resources to get what they want done. How does the average person compete when the
Yeah.
policymaker is already in
And
that
I
person's
and I
bag?
guess my question to that would be for the people out there, right? And so we end with this kind of rhetorical question, you know,
Mhm.
how do we as individuals in society, fight back, or push back the potential negative impact of really any kind of technology, right? So not just AI technology, or you think about, how do we push back against big government, big business, big law, big healthcare, and so on and so forth, right? You think about how larger corporations, and multinational corporations have managed to kind of have this globalizing reach, right, on us as individuals. And we just kind of, and Isaro puts it this way, which I think is really precise and accurate. Like how do we fight back, right? How do I compete with my, $2,000 bank account against a $2 billion legal budget, right?
Right.
And I think these are valid questions, and more reason for us, I think, as individuals to get educated, to spend the time
Mhm.
learning, to like continue to have this healthy skepticism that Isaro talks about. And
Mhm.
so thank you so much for those of you who tuned in. Thank you, Isaro, for having this, like, it wasn't supposed to be a debate, but
It well, we have these conversations
but
anyway.
but for having
Usually
this
when
like
we look at
healthy debate, and really just like talking through some of the points, and we said a lot here. So if you have
Mhm.
questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, on LinkedIn or on YouTube, and one of us will get to the responses at some point.
Yes.
And I'm actually going to continue this Yes.AI series. I think it's going to be something I do on a quarterly basis. And kind of as more information becomes available, kind of, having
Mhm.
this progressive look at it, because I think that's so important. And so, Isaro, any last words for the audience?
For the creatives who are interested in pushing back, I definitely recommend looking into some of the research and data science and computer science departments at universities who are heading some projects that are they're seemingly very promising and have already been doing what's necessary. I think in a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
fight for pushing back. So definitely look into that. Like there are a lot of, especially when it comes to the visual
Mm-hmm.
arts. There's a lot of stuff going into masking and obfuscating the content that you even put out that gets sucked
Mm-hmm.
up into AI and, you know, kind of prompts it to hallucinate with like the things that are
Right.
coming out of it. So if you are looking to protect yourself, definitely look into
Yeah.
those things.
All right. Well,